Have you ever felt overwhelmed when faced with the simple task of selecting a television program or deciding what food to order? Initially, the concept of unrestricted choice appears to be the ultimate objective theoretically. An increased number of options should correlate with a greater sense of liberation. But what if I were to suggest that this perceived abundance is not truly liberating, but instead induces a state of paralysis? What if an excessive number of possibilities doesn't signify freedom, but rather constitutes a subtle form of confinement? In a contemporary society that idealizes limitless possibilities, why is it that we are increasingly susceptible to feelings of anxiety and uncertainty? Reflect on this on a daily basis. You encounter a multitude of minor decisions, sometimes numbering in the hundreds. Should you opt for coffee or tea? Should you dedicate your time to work or study? Should you remain in your current situation or seek a change? These decisions may appear inconsequential, but internally your mind is perpetually engaged in a battle against an unseen adversary. The apprehension of making an incorrect determination. Barry Schwartz has termed this phenomenon the paradox of choice. His research indicates that while the presence of some degree of choice is undoubtedly preferable to having no options at all, an overabundance of choices can lead to inaction rather than liberation. When confronted with a seemingly insurmountable array of possibilities, our response is often either to avoid making a decision altogether or to experience regret regarding the choice we ultimately make. Freedom, in theory, should empower us. However, in practice, it often overwhelms us, suffocating us under the sheer weight of infinite possibilities. Envision yourself standing at a juncture where numerous paths stretch out before you, each extending infinitely into the distance. The prospect of being able to select any path may initially sound appealing, but this excitement quickly diminishes upon realizing that it is impossible to explore every option. Each selection inherently involves a loss. Every decision made necessarily excludes a multitude of alternative possibilities. And with each exclusion comes a nagging sense of uncertainty. Did I make the right choice? Have I inadvertently foreclosed access to a more fulfilling existence? Our predecessors existed in a simpler environment, where the range of choices was constrained by necessity. They consumed what they were able to hunt. They wore garments that they were capable of weaving. They cherished the relationships they had with those around them, as there were no dating applications promising an endless stream of potential partners. Just a swipe away. Within this simplicity, there existed a clarity that we, in our modern context, have seemingly lost. Centuries ago, Søren Kierkegaard cautioned against the anxiety that can accompany freedom. He posited that the overwhelming awareness of possibilities inherent in human freedom can induce paralysis. We are often filled with dread at the realization that at any given moment, we possess the ability to fundamentally alter the trajectory of our lives. However, instead of feeling empowered by this potential, we are frequently burdened by the associated responsibility. Freedom in this context transforms from a gift into a source of anxiety. Consider the ways in which contemporary consumer culture exploits this inherent anxiety. Enter any supermarket and you will be greeted by a dizzying array of choices. Countless brands of bottled water, hundreds of varieties of breakfast, cereal, and endless aisles of products that promise to satisfy every conceivable desire. Do these choices truly enhance your satisfaction, or do they instead foster a persistent sense that you may have selected the wrong brand, the wrong item of clothing, or even the wrong path in life? Every seemingly insignificant decision now carries a disproportionate amount of emotional weight. We are haunted by what psychologists refer to as anticipated regret, the apprehension that we will ultimately come to regret the decision we are about to make. Instead of acting decisively, we become paralyzed, delaying our choices and agonizing over the potential consequences. Choice, in this context, becomes a burden rather than a privilege. And yet societal messaging continues to reinforce the notion that an increased number of options equates to greater freedom, and that greater freedom leads to increased happiness. But what if this equation is fundamentally flawed? What if our preoccupation with maximizing the number of options available to us is, in reality, a concealed form of enslavement? In his research, Schwartz identified an even more concerning trend. When individuals are confronted with an excessive number of options, even when they ultimately select something that is objectively beneficial, they tend to experience a diminished sense of satisfaction. Why is this the case? Because with every positive choice comes the persistent nagging thought of the potentially superior alternatives that they might have pursued. We are constantly evaluating our reality against an idealized perfect alternative, and inevitably, reality falls short of this unattainable standard. Our dissatisfaction stems not from the inherent inadequacy of our choices, but rather from the fact that our expectations, which are inflated by the illusion of limitless possibilities, are unrealistically high. Social media platforms amplify this effect exponentially. Every scroll through our feeds exposes us. We find ourselves constantly measuring our lives against the highlight reels of others, observing seemingly superior existences filled with more travel, higher earnings, and more fulfilling relationships. Subconsciously, every decision we undertake undergoes a silent evaluation against the curated and idealized choices presented by others. It's hardly surprising, then, that contentment eludes us and that feelings of anxiety, depression, and paralysis are so prevalent. Even love, traditionally considered the most personal and intimate of human experiences, has become tainted by this comparative mindset. Dating applications offer an endless array of potential partners, creating a sense of limitless possibility. When difficulties arise in a relationship, the contemporary inclination isn't to address the issues constructively, but rather to question whether a more suitable match is merely a swipe away. Relationships consequently become transient, valued for their convenience rather than their depth. The philosopher Erich Fromm posited that genuine freedom transcends mere liberation from constraints. It embodies the liberty to evolve into a fully realized individual. Authentic freedom, he asserted, is anchored in commitment, not in the pursuit of infinite possibilities. It entails selecting a course and pursuing it steadfastly, acknowledging that other potential paths must necessarily be relinquished. Absent commitment, we remain perpetually at a standstill, endlessly enticed by distant and unexplored avenues. Søren Kierkegaard termed this state the despair of possibility, characterizing it as the affliction of being overwhelmed by options, leading to a lack of commitment to any single one, and thus preventing true and meaningful living. Are we genuinely more liberated in the present day, or are we simply submerged in a sea of superficial choices that hinder profound and meaningful experiences? Reflect upon the last significant decision you faced. Did it evoke a sense of liberation, or did it leave you feeling drained? Did you feel invigorated, or did you experience a sense of disorientation, questioning your decision even after it was made? Each option promises gratification, and each path whispers promises of fulfillment upon selection. However, true fulfillment doesn't arise from impeccable decision-making. Rather, it emerges from embracing the inherent imperfections of choice itself, from committing to a decision not because it represents the optimal outcome, but because it is a personally chosen one. Contemporary society often romanticizes the notion of maintaining open possibilities, advising against settling down and encouraging constant upgrades, and the pursuit of the next great opportunity. However, it often fails to acknowledge that a life dedicated to ceaseless seeking and perpetual dissatisfaction. Genuine personal development occurs when we cease the endless browsing and commence the process of building. It happens when we stop dwelling on the myriad lives we could have potentially lived and begin fully embracing the one we have actively chosen. Every choice entails sacrifice. Every path necessitates the relinquishment of alternative routes. Maturity lies not in the elimination of sacrifice, but in its graceful acceptance. Freedom is not about possessing everything. It is about choosing something meaningful and dedicating oneself wholeheartedly to it. Perhaps true freedom resides not in maximizing options, but in mastering the art of commitment. What if the real paradox is that freedom, when unbounded, leads not to contentment but to despair? Nevertheless, the central inquiry persists, considering that an excess of options can overwhelm us. Why do we persistently pursue an increasing number of them? What motivates society to celebrate unrestricted liberty, as though it represents the definitive achievement? Kierkegaard cautioned us that the apprehension stemming from abundant opportunities presents a dilemma. As the quantity of choices expands, we increasingly grapple with the burden of accountability. Each selection transforms into not merely a deed, but also a surrender. To select a singular route involves foregoing a limitless array of alternatives. Understandably, with each novel prospect, the worry of potential regret amplifies, further immersing us in dejection. The cocondary of choice is evident in today's world, from grocery stores overflowing with countless breakfast cereals to the ceaseless swiping on dating platforms. Our quest for absolute liberty has inadvertently constructed a maze with no escape. Paralyzed by such abundance, we delay action and question what we truly want. We contemplate whether the subsequent possibility might offer superior fulfillment and flawlessness. As we waver, life slips away undetected, as Kierkegaard might suggest. Our downfall stems not from significant transgressions or major defeats, but from a continuous stream of minor uncertainties. The term analysis paralysis is used by psychologists, but it signifies something deeper than simply being mentally stuck. It represents a fundamental existential issue, highlighting our anxiety about fully committing to decisions within a culture that suggests limitless opportunities to reconsider. Our fear of selecting a path originates from an intrinsic understanding that choosing inherently involves a form of loss, a symbolic diminishment. To decide means eliminating alternate routes. Ultimately, it forces us to confront and acknowledge our own mortality, limitations, and fragile nature. Barry Schwartz's work indicates that an excessive number of choices can diminish contentment, even following a selection. Feelings of remorse, the urge to compare, and a lack of confidence intensify. Rather than appreciating the liberty we possess, we lament the opportunities we didn't pursue. More alarmingly, we begin to question our own judgment. The availability of numerous alternatives prompts the question of why a specific choice was made. Doubts arise concerning one's ability and intelligence in identifying the optimal option. The pressure to achieve flawlessness overwhelms us, transforming the ease of living into an oppressive weight. Consider the ramifications of this on your everyday existence. Selecting a film on a digital service ought to be a straightforward enjoyment, yet it frequently transforms into agony. Picking a professional direction should involve building your sense of self, but it morphs into a draining quest for the ideal vocation, one that might never materialize. Selecting a spouse should be driven by affection, yet it gets tainted by the worry that a superior option is merely a screen tap away. Liberty morphs into a burden, masquerading as something positive. Here lies the most profound paradox in our pursuit of ultimate liberty. We become subjugated by that very freedom. Rather than experiencing life to its fullest potential, we find ourselves confined within a realm of infinite choices, akin to spirits, doomed to roam among roads not traveled. As the number of alternatives increases, our capacity to make decisions diminishes. As we amass greater autonomy, our understanding of how to utilize it dwindles. The more we chase contentment, the less significance we discover. According to Kierkegaard, anxiety arises from the overwhelming sensation of liberty. Confronted with the boundless array of choices inherent in being, a person experiences a sense of giddiness akin to gazing into a chasm. The abundance of freedom not only highlights what we could become, but also our fundamental insignificance. It compels us to acknowledge that life lacks an inherent purpose. Instead, we bear the responsibility of forging our own. However, the endeavor of constructing meaning from limitless options is so frightening that numerous individuals opt for inaction, shunning dedication, decisions, and genuine experience. So, what's the answer? Is sacrificing liberty for tranquility the right move? Should we restrict our actions to prevent hardship? Schwartz puts forward a straightforward yet groundbreaking idea. Welcome the concept of good enough. Instead of pursuing the ideal selection, try to value what is adequate, genuine, and within reach. Kierkegaard highlights a more profound root. The act of selection itself should be viewed as a fundamental, life-defining pledge. This isn't due to discovering the flawless solution, but because in the process of choosing, we shape our own identities. Liberty isn't about identifying the optimal possibility. Instead, it involves taking accountability for assigning significance to the possibility we ultimately select. Within a culture captivated by limitless potential, wholeheartedly committing to a single course of action with bravery and conviction transforms into a defiant gesture. This opposes the pervasive discontent within the prevailing mindset. It serves as a declaration: I do not merely succumb to the abundance of choices. Rather, I purposefully shape the narrative of my life. It involves acknowledging the illusory nature of absolute assurance and recognizing that genuine liberation arises from accepting our flaws, constraints, and finite existence. Whenever you put off making a choice while hoping for an ideal solution, consider your underlying anxieties. Are you truly worried about selecting the wrong path? Or are you simply hesitant to make any selection at all? Does the fear of missing out drive you? Or are you actually afraid of taking control and responsibility for your life's direction? Keep in mind that failing to choose is, in itself, a decision. Furthermore, it's frequently the most debilitating one. In the presence of limitless possibilities, the most courageous individuals are those who select a single course of action, fully aware that other options will be forsaken. These are people who grasp that liberty devoid of dedication is hollow. They are the ones who venture to experience the repercussions of their decisions without lamenting the alternatives they might have pursued. Ultimately, they recognize that our defining characteristic is not the sheer number of available opportunities, but rather the fortitude with which we embrace the limited number that we genuinely pursue in life. When you next find yourself struggling amidst numerous possibilities, bear in mind that a greater number of options doesn't automatically equate to increased autonomy. Occasionally, the most freeing action is to impose constraints on yourself. Make selections intentionally. Dedicate yourself without assurances of success. Acknowledge what you relinquish. And crucially, derive significance from your decision, even if flawed. The reality is that genuine liberty isn't found in possessing everything imaginable. Rather, it resides in wholeheartedly devoting yourself to an endeavor, an individual, a direction, or even simply to existence itself. Having recognized the potential for an abundance of options to insidiously limit you, the central question persists. How will you utilize the liberty you possess? Will you persist in aimlessly navigating a limitless sea of alternatives? Or will you ultimately commit to experiencing a singular existence? Ultimately, the essence lies not in possessing boundless opportunities, but in summoning the bravery to affirm a specific life path. This involves accepting inherent flaws, proceeding along a designated route fully aware that other avenues existed. It means engaging in love, despite the potential for suffering, and embracing life, despite its inevitable conclusion. Genuine liberty transcends the mere accumulation of possessions. Instead, it involves dedicating oneself entirely to the selections one makes. Through this act of choosing, one ultimately actualizes their true self. Given your heightened awareness of how an excessive number of options can function as a deceptive constraint, cloaked in the guise of freedom, how will you approach the next instance when confronted with a vast spectrum of possibilities? Will you become overwhelmed by them? Or will you make a deliberate selection, recognizing that perfection is unattainable and that authentic freedom resides not in maximizing choices, but in imbuing significance into the limited number of decisions you summon the courage to enact? Share your insights in the space, provided and encourage an acquaintance to reconsider the genuine meaning of freedom, for often the sole means of attaining authentic liberation involves deliberately reducing the scope of our selections and enriching the quality of our experiences.